so much for joining us.
Thanks, Zach. Great to be here.
So first off, I think like before we kind of jump in, I just want to say, obviously, like we've talked a couple of times. I'm not only like super excited about Blocknative as a tool, I'm also, and as a company, but I'm also really excited to get your perspective as a founder. You're like one of the most insightful sort of product-oriented founders that I've had the joy of like talking to within the Web3 space. So really excited about this conversation. Thank you so much for making the time to sort of sit down with us. Matt, why don't you kind of introduce yourself for the rest of the community and those who may not know you.
Sure. Hey, everybody, and thanks for the warm welcome, Zach. My name is Matt Cutler. I'm founder and CEO of Blocknative. See right back there. I always like to say I'm a glutton for punishment. Depending on how you count, I've founded between 7 and 8 businesses. I've taken them public, I've sold them off, I've shut them down, I've split them up, I've merged them together. So I've been around the block a few times. I've earned each and every one of these gray hairs. By way of background, my first ever company was an internet startup back in 1994, long before it was fashionable to do internet companies or to do them as an undergrad. That one was called NetGenesis. It was the first ever web analytics business, and it was a 9-year overnight success, 0 to IPO, and when it went public, it was one of the top 35 IPOs in history at the time. And then my last startup was called Collaborate.com. It was a mobile collaboration platform, and we sold that to Cisco, and I was an exec at Cisco for about 4 years. And then we started Blocknative coming up on 2 years ago now.
Wow, that's incredible. And so like, why don't you, I mean, I would love to schedule another interview at some point, just talking about what it's like going from idea to IPO. I don't think that's something that's covered super well, especially in the Web3 space. But why don't you kind of talk through Blocknative? So tell me about your current project and sort of, especially for someone like you, you've done so much. I think you probably have a better sense of opportunity cost than most people do in this space. Kind of talk like, why are you working on Blocknative versus something else? Like, how did that evolve, and how did you decide to sort of, this is the thing that you're going to work on?
Well, so first off, like all of my startups in technology have been fairly early in transformative areas of technology. And I was lucky to be getting out of school just at the same time that the internet was coming around. And I did a lot of really foundational work in the early days of the internet, which, by the way, it's really romantic to think about internet in 95, 96, 97. It was hard, right? It was a hard time to be doing stuff because there was a lot of doubt about what it was going to become. It took me a little while to really start to tune into blockchain. I had a few friends who were telling me I needed to pay attention. And once I really started to tune in, and I realized, boy, this is the most transformative class of technology since the internet, and arguably more transformative. And, you know, I've seen this movie before, and last time through, I learned a whole bunch. I made a lot of mistakes. And so, you know, it's a pretty unusual opportunity for someone in my stage of my career to be able to take a second bite at that apple and to dive in and be a part of a massive, you know, a second massive transformation. Now, what we do at Blocknative today is we're experts in what we call value in motion. If you think about the universe of on-chain data, that represents value at rest. Everything's settled out, everyone can see what happens, and there's a whole bunch of interesting things you can do with on-chain data. We specialize in mempool data, or transactions in flight, right? And so this characterizes value in motion. It's the money as it's moving, or the value as it's moving. And we've built a global platform to capture, normalize, characterize, extend, and do useful things with that. And we're uncovering new interesting applications of it every single day, which is pretty awesome. We didn't start out doing this. It's not necessarily an obvious problem, and that's one of my big entrepreneurial lessons is you have to listen. You know, you build something and bring it to market, and then the market tells you what's interesting about it. So we started out doing something completely unrelated, and through a series of pieces of market feedback, we wound up focusing and specializing in the mempool.
Oh, that's incredible. So, I mean, did you come to I think value in motion is like one of the more, I think it's a really interesting product thesis, like unique insight to sort of approach the market with. Did you come to, was the initial product built sort of with that thesis in mind, or did the value in motion sort of develop as you sort of iterated towards product market fit?
Well, no. So it's quite the opposite. Believe it or not, the business started out building crypto collectible games, very much
Oh,
inspired by CryptoKitties.
yeah.
And I won't go too far into this, but at Cisco, I organized a global design community and did a whole bunch of design-related leadership work. I'm a big believer in user testing. And so we had when we first built this, we built this NFT game. I said, let's do some user testing. The user testing was miserable, the worst user testing I've ever seen in my career.
Wow.
And it was not because what we had built was so bad. It was because the state of the art of Ethereum usability was awful. The user just had to know all of these things about that you needed a wallet, where to get a wallet, and what was a real wallet, what was a fake wallet, and how to get currency, and how to put it into the wallet, and how to install the wallet and configure it and use it. And hey, by the way, when you did certain things, value actually moved. You needed to know to go to the special site. You needed to be able to interpret the log file it coughed back at you. You needed to know to press refresh. And all these sorts of things that just normal people were never going to figure out. And our user testing made that really clear. The team at the time said, guys, not my fault, like not our fault, not our issue. That's an Ethereum issue. And I said, we can't launch something that nobody can use. Mm-hmm. Why don't we try to do something about it? And it seems sort of obvious now, but we were among the very first to say, what could we build technology products to make this stuff easier to use? And so we built two little widgets. Widget one basically made it easier to onboard people in a wallet, sort of guided them through the process. And widget two told people what were going on with transactions as they were happening. We then went back and did user testing, and it was way better. And I thought, great, okay, let's move on to the next thing.
Problem solved.
And then I showed what we were building to other members of the ecosystem, and like 6 out of 6 meetings went the same way. This game you're building, these helper apps you have, super cool. Could I have one of those? Could you generalize that? Right?
Wow.
And you hear that enough times, and you think maybe there's an opportunity to build developer tools, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of how we shifted focus from building end user facing experiences towards using developer facing experiences. And then once we were in market, we launched the company. It seems like a lifetime ago, but just over a year ago in December 2019, we were approached by a wallet manufacturer who said, we love what you do, but there's one feature in particular that we want. It's this notion of being able to tell a user what's going on in the transaction, but we don't want it as pixels on a screen. We want it as an API. We want it for all of the wallet addresses of our user base. We want to notify users for inbound and outbound transactions, and we'll pay you for it. And that was the first time anyone in the space had ever offered to pay us for anything. And so as a CEO, of course, I said, sure, we can do it. And then I turned to my CTO and I said, can we do it? And he said, yes, but not with what we currently have. We had to go build a bunch of technology and a whole platform to make that possible. So it's a non-obvious problem that requires a non-obvious and actually a relatively sophisticated and expensive to operate solution, because you actually have to stand up a whole bunch of nodes. You got to place those nodes in various parts around the world. You got to configure those nodes in such a way that they're very fast and that they're capturing everything and in different characteristics. There's a whole node management challenge that we have, and then build a system to capture the data, enrich the data, and emit events associated with the data. And so once we sort of got through that, we realized, hey, what we're doing is we're seeing all the value in motion. We have census level data on every transaction in the world for all value, for all the time as it's happening. And that turns out to be a pretty valuable set of information to be able to work with. So that's what we do.
That's incredible. And when you're, and out of curiosity, so when you say you were approached by the wallet manufacturer, you started like building this piece out. Was that pre ETH Denver 2019, or was that post?
Oh no, that was post. So we had launched the company. We're in market, right? And so my entrepreneurial experience is binary. Those teams I've been a part of that were able to listen to the feedback coming back and adjust their product plans based on what the market was responding to were the ones that were successful. And those that did not, that ignored the feedback or carried on in a direction, even though there wasn't clear evidence of engagement or traction, failed, right? And so I, as a product focused leader, I listened very carefully to where folks are reacting positively. And it's really easy to miss what they say. It's really easy to hear what you want to hear. And so the hardest thing in any technology industry and any startup is getting people to care about what you're building. And oftentimes what you think is cool and what the market thinks are cool is different things. And always go with what the market is doing, because you're way more likely to find product market fit that way.
I love that. And just to clarify, because it's important to kind of underline, when you say what the market finds interesting. What do you mean? Like, could you kind of underline that?
Oh, so I would say the number one thing, the number one commodity that you're competing for is user attention.
Mhm.
And so the challenge is at any given moment, any one of us have a million different things competing for our attention. And
Mhm.
so it's not about being relevant or interesting. It's about being the most relevant thing in the universe for a slice of time, for a slice of user. And those users who will be attracted to you and engage with the product will tell you, like, this is what's interesting to me and this is why. And listening very carefully to that, because if you're number 2 or number 400, it doesn't matter. Your users are paying attention to something else, right?
Agreed. I
And
mean,
so,
oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
no, no, I mean, what's the need? Who's the person? What's the need? How do they discover your solution? When they engage with their solution, how do they get feedback that they're on the right path? All these sorts of things go into being able to distill down user attention and therefore, hey, the pathway forward.
And I think it, especially like when you're building consumer apps, right? It's very much like the attention, especially like free to use consumer apps. It is like the attention piece, or like free to use to slash like nominal payments. And then with the, what I think is really interesting is that you still think of it as consumer attention, even whenever it gets into, I mean, like you're building essentially like tool sets for a craftsman, right? Like, and it's still an important thing to think through, like the attention mechanics as well.
Yeah, Zach, I like to say developers are people too, right?
Yeah.
And so, they have the same, competition for their time. If anything, they're more discriminating about how they use their time, arguably. And of course, with developers, the option's always, do I build this myself or do I use a third-party solution, right? And so, we prioritize developer experience. Anyone can get started, can get a real-time data feed of live transactions coming off the mempool in less than 4.5 minutes, literally. I mean,
Wow.
you can do it in maybe 3 minutes if you really know what you're doing. But the whole point is that it's easy in that folks who are curious or interested can get productive in very short order. And there's many things that go into that, obviously, but yeah, developers matter. Developer attention is precious.
So I guess that leads us to kind of the next question, which is like you built this solution for the wallet manufacturer. Let's say like developers heard your pitch, they're all in. Like, what does this specifically solve, especially for like teams like sort of building out that DApp experience, both on the onboarding and then on like the established user side?
Sure. So our core platform is called Notify, and it's
Mhm.
a global infrastructure that you get access to via an API. At its sort of lowest and most powerful level, you tell us addresses you care about, whether those are wallet addresses or smart contract addresses, and we emit real-time events describing all transactions against those addresses in every state change. So transaction enters the mempool as pending, transaction changes to confirm, transaction gets speed up or canceled, transaction failed. These are all events that you get. You get a whole bunch of metadata associated with the transaction to make it easy to work with. And we recently introduced features around being able to do the same thing for internal transactions, which is pretty cool. And we're going to building that out. And in the not too distant future, we'll be adding support for Bitcoin as well as Ethereum, we support today. So the whole idea is if you care about value in motion, we got you covered, and it's super easy to work with. On top of that API, we offered an SDK, just sort of a higher level component, a little bit easier to work with smaller teams. On top of that, we offer rich front-end JavaScript libraries. One of them is called Notify.js, which will actually paint pixels associated with transactions. And at the very top of our stack, we have a library called Onboard, which does the stuff we started with. It helps get people into wallets and helps them get them set up and configured so they can be productive. So if you're a DApp developer and you want to support a wide range of wallets, it's one of the most powerful and flexible libraries out there to just make it really easy to get your users into, whether not just MetaMask, but Portis and Fortmatic and Ethereum, and pretty soon, very shortly, hardware wallets and a whole bunch of interesting capabilities out there. And so we support a pretty significant gamut, and we make it just really easy for developers to provide great experiences out to end users from top to bottom.
That's incredible. Whenever you say it, I mean, I hear not just what is immediately available, but what is available in the very near future. And especially like kind of as you see, like almost the market sort of fragment between the different sort of wallets that you have available to use and that sort of thing. Like, how do you as a product kind of a, like the sort of responsible for the vision of the product, how do you, I guess, like make decisions around prioritization around them, right? Like how do you sort of determine which, like what features are you're rolling out when and where and that sort of thing?
So it's a great question. So I'd say we service like prototypes, people building in hackathons. We service dApps, marketplaces, protocols, exchanges, wallets, and enterprises. So no matter where you are in the stack, you care about understanding value in motion and delivering great user experiences. So we support all of that. What we tend to do is we have a pretty rich product roadmap. Believe me, we have a lot of things we want to get building. And we prioritize that based on in-market customer needs, sort of demonstrated, hey, this team needs this thing. If we build this, they're going to go live with that, and then we're going to have a customer reference associated with that. And we do a lot of validation. So we talk about product stuff all the time internally, but we generally don't do speculative execution. We don't say, let's go build this and hope someone will come in. We then go out and say, well, who might want it? And we say, hey, we're thinking about building this. What do you think, right? Every single time we do that, we learn like, oh, we didn't know about that. And oh, this thing we thought was cool, they're not that interested in. But and then it just clarifies the development priorities. It clarifies what are the must-have versus the nice-to-have. And then it also brings the customer and user into the development process and then makes them excited about what's coming out and built-in testing and things like that. So we try to stay very closely connected to the needs of the marketplace. I've tried other alternatives, and what I've found historically is it's really easy to get it wrong. And when you burn a whole bunch of time and you burn a whole bunch of development cycles and you're burning a whole bunch of money, and no one cares about what you built, it's not a great feeling, right? So that's how I know how to.
Out of curiosity, like, and this is, we can edit this out. This is not on the script. This is just me being curious, so we can edit this out if there's no good stats. But I'm super curious as far as, do you have any idea as far as onboarding rates for dApps, like with and without these sort of helper tools? Like, do you know like what the conversion rate sort of uptick is with Blocknative?
We sort of do. We generally, we have to be really cautious about aggregating data across our clients for all the reasons you might expect.
Right.
But what our customers self-report is significant. So the number one piece of feedback we get is reduced support volume, right? Hey, by using your library, people are really clear about what they need to do and why. So we wind up handling a lot less of the baseline support requests that actually take a lot of time, and there's real cost savings with that. Two, we report higher rates of user satisfaction, right? That people are generally happy with their experiences end to end. And the net result of that is increased transaction volume, increased transaction frequency, and increased transaction value. Right?
Interesting.
Now, it varies a great deal, but what we find in general is blockchain transactions are anxiety inducing, and not just for new users, but for all users. And anything a developer can do to reduce transaction anxiety and increase transaction confidence will have measurable impact on outcomes. And so we help directly with that sort of stuff. Again, the overall volumes vary by project and vary by market segment, but it's pretty clear, users feel better, users do more, end of story.
Well, I mean, especially like we're building trustless technologies, right? I think one of the the core design concepts that people, I think, I don't feel like blockchain has changed design so much as it's made it's made the core fundamentals of design that much more important to get correct. Like in Web 2, it was important to communicate what the app was doing, but you could kind of get away with not as much verbose communication because a lot of it was instantaneous, right? Like you've even transitioned constant saves and those sort of things via Google Docs. Whereas like now, constant communication becomes paramount because you're building these quote unquote trustless technologies where there is no arbiter, there is no there is no sort of a third party that you appeal to. And so for your protocol or for your dApp to really, I guess instill that trust that people are willing to trust it with the funds or with your data or whatever, you have to constantly be telling them what is happening, why is it happening, et cetera. That's what I really find really exciting about Blocknative is that it is it's almost that missing piece, right? It's almost that missing piece to start building that sort of non-arbitrated trust between the user and the dApp or the protocol that you're utilizing.
We certainly would like to think so. And I would say a couple things. First off, that blockchains by definition are transaction engines. And so if you're building anything in this ecosystem, you're fundamentally dealing with value. And anytime you have value moving around, you got to over communicate, right? You got to be really clear. You got to be really explicit because there's real stakes at play. And by the way, one of the things we did in the early days is we thought it'd be great to help users get familiar using test nets. And what we found is users just didn't care because it's play money and no one really cares about play money. You flip them over to a mainnet application with literally $5 of value at play and they seize right up, right? It changes everything. And you go, look, it's only $5. It doesn't matter if you lose it. Oh no, right? And just as soon as you introduce real value, the user perception of the experience changes dramatically, right? And part of a lot of what we do is we enable decentralized applications to feel alive, right? To provide feedback, to let the user know that something important is happening, to let the user need to know next steps, right? As opposed to something like lifeless that you just sort of sit there and you try to poke at it. If you poke it the right way, something may emit, and if you poke it the wrong way, something bad might happen, right? We're trying to make these decentralized applications, or at least help developers make them much more approachable, much more interactive, much more conversational in terms of their interactions.
I love that. That's fantastic. So I think a large segment of our audience are folks who are building out their first prototypes, their first MVPs of their ideas, right? Their dApps, their protocols, et cetera. Let's say, like, what should they be looking for to incorporate Blocknative into their sort of initial build, their MVP? Is this something that they should incorporate at the start? Is this something that they should think of later as they sort of roll it out? Like, what are the benefits that they get upon initial rollout?
Well, so particularly if you're a small team, I would say definitely bake it in the beginning. Usability is not the sort of thing you add right before you ship, right? It's got to be thought through the whole way. And what our libraries do is basically bring you up the usability power curve really quickly, and they're very flexible, customizable. You're in control the whole time, and so really there's sort of three things to keep in mind. Is hey, if you're doing anything where a user is going to need to use a wallet, check out Onboard.js, and it provides a great inventory of capabilities and guides users through and just prevents a lot of common mistakes and help you avoid support requests. Two, we have a library called Notify.js that when users conduct transactions will provide feedback on screen, again, fully customizable, so you can tell people, hey, the sticker that you created is being minted right now. Hold on, here's a timer on it. It's been completed. Go check this, right? If you have more sophisticated users who do things like replacement transactions, it knows how to correct for that and follow that along, so your experience is going to be consistent. If you're a protocol developer, I would recommend using our API or SDK, but probably our API. And what that can help you do is understand like protocol performance. So not only how many transactions are happening against your protocol, but how long do they take? A lot of protocols have slippage considerations and things like that. And so being able to monitor transaction performance in real time matters. The other thing we can do is you can start to see anomalous transactions. So these days there's a lot of exploits that are out there, and because we're able to detect things happening as they're occurring, you can begin to spot things where you go, that's a strange transaction, what's going on here? And so potentially provide some downside limitation. And then the final thing, if you're more sophisticated technically, you can use these our APIs to trigger events. So based on this sort of transaction happening over here against this wallet or against this contract, do this other thing. You can start to string together real-time logic. And we've already seen some examples of this in the marketplace. And there's some whole next generation experiences that are happening. So I guess what I would say is if you're a developer, we give you a whole new colors to paint with and you can do new things. And we're not trying to tell you what you should do or not do. We're trying to unleash your creative potential and not have you slog through a whole bunch of stuff that's already been solved.
That's incredible. Do you have, are those experiments live? If they are, I'll include them in the show notes.
Yeah, so probably one of the more interesting one came out of ETH Denver 2020. It was a hackathon project called Outfront, and you can see their presentation and their library is open source. And they created a really clever application built entirely on top of our API that basically detects malicious transactions in the event of someone steals private keys. And if someone's trying to remove funds from one of your accounts, it basically proactively initiates a new transaction with more gas, i.e. front run, and pushes the funds in question to a designated safe wallet to protect them, right? And again, it's a prototype, but it starts to show like, hey, there's all sorts of really interesting programmatic things you can do if you're able to detect things happening in real time and you're able to respond in real time. That requires automation, obviously, but our whole platform is built to make these sorts of things possible.
Oh, that is so cool. So yes, I will, for those watching or listening, I will be including that ETH Denver 2020 presentation in the show notes after I watch it, because that sounds incredible. So let's say that like I wanted to get started. Where do I get started?
Okay, so by all means, just go to blocknative.com. You can create a free account. What I always recommend, just to get a feel for what we do, is set up a real-time data feed. It's really pretty straightforward. You create a user account. You have to confirm your email address. You go into our backend dashboard. You have to issue an API key, and this is only so we can keep the data separate for accounts. Once you have an API key, you can associate a webhook with that API key. That's a destination for data to get written out to. It's really easy to add a webhook to Slack. It's really easy to add a webhook to Discord, or you can set up your own. And then you just, once the webhook is associated, you give it addresses you care about. So you can give one or more addresses, and within less than a second, you'll start getting events coming off of our API. And you can do this, by the way, on any testnet. So it's Ethereum mainnet, all the major testnets as well. And so you can use this with your own wallet on a testnet, and you can watch the transactions go back and forth, or you could put in a contract address for a common DeFi protocol like 0x, which has pretty high transaction volume, and you can watch that happen. And you can start to see right away, like, oh, this is the payloads that I'm going to get. And then think about creative and interesting things you can do with that. Again, further up the stack, we write, paint pixels on screens with JavaScript libraries. We help people onboard. It's a pretty flexible, pretty fluid tool set. The final thing that I'll say is we have a lot of public documentation. It's really clear how all this stuff works. That's docs.blocknative.com. It's on our homepage. And then I always say the last thing is we have a pretty vibrant Discord community where we do real-time technical support, and you can see what other people are doing. And the link to the Discord community is at the bottom in the footer of our homepage, and definitely go there. It's the best way to see our GitHub activity, see other support stuff, ask questions, connect with other members of our ecosystem.
Awesome. Yeah, you answered my last question, which was essentially how do I ask for help. Out of curiosity, would you want to talk a little bit about? You guys just released kind of a huge, really interesting research report as well. I'd love to link to if you wanted to get about that.
Yeah, so our blog is a pretty great resource. We publish pretty regularly on the blog, and we just released some net new research about global blockchain transaction volumes. We sort of assumed this would be readily available information. We were kind of surprised that no one's ever done it. And so we were able to uncover a pretty interesting data source from the guys at Coinmetrics, and we worked pretty closely with them. And we published research around how many transactions have occurred in history. And it turns out, since the Genesis block of Bitcoin in 2009, there's been about 3.1 billion transactions across the 24 top chains. But significantly, 1.1 billion of those transactions occurred in 2019 alone, or 37% of all transactions that ever occurred in history have occurred basically in the past 12 months in 2019. And so that lets us project forward with a compound annual growth rate of about 44%. And what we basically show is over the next 5 years, assuming nothing changes, just linear growth, like no major factors, which it almost certainly won't be, but for the sake of argument, this is what we know, that's what's going to happen. We can expect about 20 billion more transactions over the course of the next 5 years. And aggregate transaction value so far has been about 4.6 trillion, and a whole bunch of stuff about that.
Wow.
We're actually publishing the model that supports that, because there's a lot of nuance underneath it. Believe it or not, like what's a blockchain transaction varies pretty highly by chain, and there's a whole bunch of factors in that. So if folks are particularly curious to actually check out the raw data, they should contact me. Probably over Twitter is easiest, at @mcutler, or they can ping me via our Discord channel, and we can give you access to the underlying data set if that would be useful. And we benefited from coin metrics, and we want to give those models back so other people can build on them as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I spent some time looking through it over the last weekend. I was blown away. It was super interesting. Looking forward to digging in further, I think. Matt, if people wanted to follow you, where should they? Like you mentioned Twitter. Is that where you're most active, or what? Where should people kind of be looking to?
Twitter's pretty good. I'm pretty easy to reach on Telegram as well. I'm at mcutler95, so it's Matt Cutler, Cutler. I'm at mcutler on all the major social media platforms except Telegram. On Telegram, I'm mcutler95. But you can find me anywhere. You can hit me up on LinkedIn. More than happy to do that. I'm reasonably busy on Twitter. If you want to see the latest from us, go to our blog. And in general, we're just really excited for everybody out there to go hands-on with our tooling and provide feedback. Many of our best product ideas are the direct result of people who are going to be listening to this, using it and saying, this would be cooler if it did X, or I wish I could do Y, or, why isn't this there? And we love to engage with people who are engaging with our stuff. It very much shapes product direction. So if you're at all curious or interested, please do check it out. We'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. I will, and for those listening, obviously, all of that will be in the show notes, so please check that out. I think in closing, Matt, just like kind of this is freestyle. What did you, what's like the most interesting, I guess, like most exciting development that you've seen recently in either like the Web3 space or just kind of in general?
Well, Web3 is a fascinating category, and it's for a while it's felt like a set of technology in search of a solution. I think everything happening in the broad DeFi category is super fascinating. Mm-hmm. And my soundbite on this is very simple. Like I ask people, what's the definition of being rich? Mm-hmm. Okay? And my definition is being rich is when your money makes money. Mm-hmm. Okay. But in the fiat world, you need to have a lot of money, and you need access to a lot of expertise that in order for your money to make money. And so it's really only available for high net worth individuals. Mm-hmm. But the world of DeFi is democratizing access to these capabilities. And anyone can have their money start making money, whether it's $10 of value or $100 of value or $1,000 of value or $50,000 of value. You can start to explore these same techniques, right? And we think this is super powerful. It's interesting for folks of my vintage, right? This is net new to, but it's particularly interesting for younger folks who are just coming into the workforce, who can reasonably start to expect, like, why is my money just going to sit there right now? Why can't my value be making value for me? And hey, if you're early in your career, you have a lot of time for compound annual interest to really start to stack up. And so in general, this is the area that I'm most excited about. It's a practical application of these technologies, but it has very real benefits to those who are ready and willing to engage. It's not the easiest to use right now, but I always say, if I were to tell people, hey, you can get a bank with a savings account that'll earn you 10%, they say, great. You go, well, it's kind of in a funny part of town. Like, that's okay, it's 10%. Like, their ATMs don't really work like regular ATMs. That's fine, right? Your account statement's not going to be like, everyone's like, that's fine. You go, it's called DeFi, it's called crypto. They go, oh, no, not for me, right? You go, look, you can reasonably achieve 10% interest rates right now if you're willing to learn about this stuff and willing to overcome some of the usability challenges. Hey, Blocknative, we're trying to make it more easy to access. We're trying to get people tuned into some of these bigger ideas, which we think are super exciting. So I think there's a really bright future ahead for the category. I think there's a really bright future ahead for the technology. It's going to take a little while to get there. And we're trying to build that future every single day. And we're called Blocknative because we see a Blocknative generation being born into a blockchain-powered future that will look back at the way we do things right now and go, that was kind of odd. And we'll say, we didn't know any better. That's how the world worked, right? So we're building that world, and we're hoping to accelerate the arrival of that generation. But anyways, it's great to get a chance to share it with everybody here. And by all means, please check it out.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt. So that does it for our conversation. Matt, again, thank you so much for your time. This has been stellar. And for everybody else who's still listening, again, I'm going to include all the links at the bottom, as well as any sort of interesting links that we kind of surface afterwards. And then obviously look to use Blocknative in the next relays, which will be including that as well. Again, Matt, thank you so much, and you have a wonderful.
Thanks, Zach. Good luck out there, everyone. Bye.